This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful multiverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on, assuming that you're watching live, and they should show up here in my chat room and we can talk directly. And I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'm glad to be able to spend this time with you. Today in the United States is Memorial Day. It is a national holiday, so I don't know that we'll have a lot of people in the chat room today, but I hope we will have a few. And my subject matter for today is based on, oh, and hello to Reverend Michael in the chat room. It's good to see you, Michael. My subject matter for today is based on the subject of this holiday. This is a holiday to honor those who have died in the military services, and by extension, those in the military service in general, and by still further extension for many people, the ancestors in general. And hello to Lolan in the chat room. It's good to see you. And hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you. Um, but in particular, this holiday honors those who have fallen in military service. So I thought the ideal subject for today would be the Pentacle Quest, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. And some of you have already, some of you will remember the Pentacle Quest. Others may have heard me talk about it before, but we'll be talking about it again. But first, I want to take a moment to talk about the other shows that are coming this week. Tomorrow, my guest Ed the Pagan and I will be talking about Gaia Thrift. So if you want to learn about the Gaia Thrift project, which will be opening presently, and you'll be hearing a lot more of on our various platforms, join us tomorrow for that. On Wednesday will be Corellian Publishing Wednesday. Chris Copeland will be my guest, and we'll be talking about whatever is new from Corellian Publishing. And hello to Vivian P. in the chat room. It's good to see you, Vivian. And Vivian says, hello, hope everyone has a peaceful Memorial Day. Thank you, Vivian. I join you in that wish. Thursday is going to be a best of Midday with Reverend Don, dealing with dreams and dream interpretation. And of course, Friday will be our weekly wrap up. And I'm finding the weekly wrap ups are interesting because each of the last several have had a particular theme, rather unintentionally in most cases, that came together at the last moment. And I'm starting to really kind of enjoy doing that. So watch and see what the theme turns out to be this week. I also want to thank those people who came to my Patreon seminar yesterday on the shadow and shadow work. And we had a wonderful seminar. I've been told by, well, actually by Renee in the chat room that it was the best seminar yet. And I kind of feel that way myself. It was very focused and thorough on this subject. But then again, this is probably the subject I speak to most commonly and most deeply of all subjects. So I thought it was a great experience. And if you're interested in my future Patreon seminars, you can check out my Patreon at revdonlewis.com. And also, tickets are available to the general public for the seminars at corellianpublishing.com. So with that, let us get on. Oh, and hello to Brenda in the chat room. It's good to see you, Brenda. I hope you're having a wonderful day and a wonderful holiday. The Pentacle Quest was a gigantic campaign in the pagan community, led by a number of community leaders, including Pete Pathfinder Davis and Selena Fox. Selena is most strongly associated with it, but they were both involved, as were many others, including myself in certain points, who were involved in advancing the Pentacle Quest. It amazes me how few people remember this or have heard of it, especially in younger generations, because it was such a big thing at the time. Not only was it a big thing in the pagan community, it even reached the mainstream community, which was necessary in order for victory to finally be achieved. And hello to Zane in the chat room. It's good to see you, Zane. The Pentacle Quest, to put it simply, was the quest for pagan and Wiccan service people to be able to request a pentacle on their tombstone as the sign of their religious affiliation. And if you remember the meaning of the term pentacle, and hello to Reverend Ed Carr in the chat room, it's good to see you, Ed. The meaning of the term pentacle is a three-dimensional representation of a metaphysical design. In this case, the design is the pentagram. And so it's a pentacle of the pentagram. And I'm wearing today basically the symbol that was fought for. This fight began in the 1990s with the relatively elderly widows of pagan service people who had died trying to get this on the tombs of their late husbands. I had the pleasure of interviewing one of the first of those widows who did not live to see the victory in the case. You can find that way, way back in the archives of Corellian TV. And there were a string of different people fighting for this. In order to be part of the legal case, the service person had to already be deceased, if I remember correctly, because otherwise they had not been able to ask for or be denied the symbol. And hello to Ed in the chat room. It's good to see you, Ed. Ed will be our guest tomorrow. One of the things that made this very frustrating is that the United States military had recognized the Wiccan religion since, I believe, 1976. And so many of these people had served openly as Wiccans, or more generally as pagans, in previous years. Although it's worth remembering that in this country, the term Wicca for a long time was the legal term that was recognized. That's part of how certain groups came under it, as opposed to the more limited definition that you might have in Britain, for example. Here, the law really affected how that word was used and how it was looked at, because that was the one that the law recognized. However, even though they'd been able to serve openly as Wiccans, when they died, they were not able to get the Wiccan pentacle on their tombstone, because while the military recognized Wicca as a quote recognized religion, the Veterans Administration did not. And so this put the families of deceased pagan Wiccan veterans in an odd place. And to get the symbol of their religion on their tombstones, they began launching a number of legal suits. And hello to New Ben in the chat room. This attracted the help of a number of larger organizations in the community, notably the Aquarian Tabernacle Church under Pete Pathfinder, and Circle Sanctuary, the Lady Liberty League under Selena Fox. Eventually, a wide range of groups became involved, and at one point, I was involved, as was the Corellian Nativist Church International at that time. It took 10 years to finally win this, and so many different things happened during that time. Another group that became involved was Americans United for Separation of Church and State. And, you know, it was a huge thing. And for a long time, it was looked at as a matter of pagan civil rights. I would say that the fight really shifted when it began to be portrayed as a matter of veterans' civil rights. Not so much connected to the religion they had been, but to the service they had done. And that really caused people to look at it very differently. And the prominent presence of a number of Wiccan veterans in the campaign, sometimes very visibly, did a lot to move that along. There were a number of forces that tried very hard to stop the eventual victory. And when that victory finally came, it was admitted that it was religious prejudice alone that had held back the eventual recognition of the pentacle for the tombstone, which is a big thing by itself. Um, and it was in 2007 when the victory was finally won. I don't know how well people remember that period of time. It was certainly a different period of time than this one, as was 1997 when this really started to gather steam. But all through this era, we have the rising power of what was originally called the New Right, the Christian coalitions, what we now call Christian nationalism or Christian dominionism. And during many of the years of this fight, they were in power in Washington, at least in a place to affect this particular battle, which is why the admission that religious prejudice was the only thing holding it back was very important. I often come back to this subject because it's very important for us not to lose sight of it. One of the things that so often happens in our community, and hello to Joshua in the chat room, and Joshua says, "Hello, Reverend Don, how are you? I am good. I'm a little tired from my weekend, but I'm good." And I'm good, but I'm serious as I look at the things behind this subject. So many people in our community fight over nonsense. They'll rip each other apart over doctrinal differences or political differences or even personality differences, forgetting that we do not always live in a friendly world. It's very hard for some of our organizations, because of these fights, to be able to work together, but we're very foolish if we think we're never going to have to work together. Those of us of my vintage, um, who have been in this community for a very long time will remember the Satanic Panic. I often come back to the Satanic Panic, which largely left our community unscathed because we were able to very effectively differentiate ourselves from the satanic community. But also because we really weren't on too many people's radar at that time. Um, but many of our organizations were able to pull together in that time of challenge to present a unified front against that danger. And it was a danger. It was during that time we had things like the Helms Amendment, which would have denied religious recognition to any church or religious organization using any positive definition of witchcraft or magic. Um, and there were many other attempts to deny us religious freedom in this country during those years. It's been a long time since we've seen too open an example of that, but I think we'd make a terrible mistake in thinking that it's not something we could see again. And every now and then we do. There was recently the whole Will Fiacco thing that we talked about here, where a particular um, relatively unknown politician tried to build a career by accusing a Wiccan priestess, specifically a Corellian priestess, of being a Satanist. This is still a problem that we face, and victories like the Pentacle Quest um, was was very important to our community, but should not lull us into a false security that the people who oppose that are gone. They're not gone. They've put their attention elsewhere, but they're not gone. Now, Joshua in the chat room says, I run a paranormal investigation organization called Phantom Detectives, LLC. And I saw that you interviewed Ryan Buell many years ago. I did. And the whole team of paranormal states, including Michelle Belanger, of whom we are very fond. Joshua says, one of my team members, Holly Faust, was part of Ryan's old group and is now helping me grow Phantom Detectives. That's very cool. Maybe we could have you on as a guest someday. Um, Feel free to send me an email at donlewishp@aol.com, and we can maybe set something up. I would love to do a little bit more with paranormal researchers. One of the things I want to do increasingly with Corellian TV, and I know that Reverend Mary would like to do with Divination TV, is really address all the different subjects of interest that people have in our community. And certainly there's a lot of interest in paranormal research. And I think that it would be fun to do more of that. Getting back to the Pentacle Quest, I cannot tell you the sense of rejoicing that people felt when they finally gave permission for the pentacle to be on those tombstones. And today, there are several hundred military tombstones with pentacles on them. Um, it was a major thing, and um, in the wake of this, a number of other pagan or non-Christian religious symbols have also been recognized, and these include the hammer of Thor, the Mjolnir, and the Awen for druids, and it really opened up um, the ability for veterans from different non-Christian groups to to work with getting their diversity recognized and getting it on their tombstones. And you might say, well, this life is over. You've moved on to the afterlife and eventually to reincarnation. Is it really important what's on your tombstone? And that's an individual thing. To me, it's very important. For one thing, I come from a tradition that practices ancestor veneration. Um, if you look at the tombstones of many members of my family, they don't necessarily proclaim our actual spirituality. Um, and I was told that this was a matter of um, a prophylactic to avoid grave desecration. I think that it's very important, not necessarily for us to have the symbol of our faith on our tombstone, because I don't know that I will ever, once I've crossed over, be all that concerned with what was on my tombstone. But if the current state of the Corellian tradition is anything representing the future, many other people will be coming to that tombstone, and it will have importance to them. At this last illustration, we went to many of the tombs of the Corellian ancestors and left offerings for them, particularly peonies. Also, things that they would have liked, like tobacco, because they were all tobacco people, most of them, and and spirits. I believe it was spiced rum, which certainly would have gone over well with many of them. And this is an aspect of ancestor veneration that's very important, visiting the ancestral tombs. When I was a child, every year we would go with baskets full of peonies that my mother grew just for that occasion, because peonies are our heraldic flower in my family. And for certain specific ancestors, she also took other flowers, those who were um, related to us, but not necessarily members of the High Corel family. They would get other flowers that had meaning to them. And what happened this weekend? And that's one of the reasons that the lustration of the living occurs in the spring in the Northern Hemisphere, because that public demonstration of ancestor veneration was tied to this holiday. For these reasons, what goes on those tombstones can be very important. The next generation needs to see we were there. Uh, with a few exceptions, if you look at my family tombstones, you can't really tell that they were highly involved in metaphysics unless you know the secret language that they were using in the symbols that they were choosing. Now, if you know that, well, then they're very metaphysical symbols. We probably should make a class about that one day. And this is true not only in Correllianism, but also in other non-Christian traditions, in certain African traditional religions, for example. There's a language that you will find in tomb markers that you only know if you know it, where things that appear to be, I guess we'd say, stream symbols have a special meaning to those who understand it. Um, but how much better if we could just be open about it? And we talk about so much today the importance of visibility, particularly for minority groups, the ability to see yourself represented in the world. And that to me is what the Pentacle campaign was really about. Prior to that, members of the military who were not um, part of what we might call your dominant religions, such as Christianity, etc., just had religiously anonymous tombstones. No one could tell they were there from their tomb markers. Today, younger people of our religions can go and see where the elder people are buried and know it. I think that's important. I think this was a very important part of our history. And again, I'm horrified by how few people really remember it. But then I look at so many things in our history and am horrified by how few people actually remember it. And in some cases, how few people knew certain things in the first place. Um, but we have problems that lead to that quite directly. One of those problems is that constant infighting. Um, that is probably the greatest bane of our community. It's less than it once was. In the 90s, witch wars were everywhere and they were terrible. And they're very often not only the source of bitter attacks from one group against another, but also often of untruths. And one of my well, it's not even a worry; it's a fact. Sometimes the untruths last longer than the actual history. Um, we were very fortunate as a movement that the Satanic Panic did eventually implode. And even though there are attempts to relaunch it, it's yet to be successful. But it had a whole different view of everything involving us, which for a little while was much more mainstream than the reality of who and what we are. Even today, if you look in conservative Christian circles, they have wildly distorted ideas of who and what we are. And this is why we need to be clear and to get the truth out into the world of who we are and what we do, and to, for want of a better way to put it, curate our own image. Because there's no one not part of our movement who really has an interest in showing us as we are. Hollywood may sometimes show us favorably, but still usually in a distorted way because they're doing it for entertainment. Conservative Christians show us as a monstrosity because they're using it as political propaganda. And hardly anyone in between seems to see us at all. And that's why we have to make sure that we are seen. One of the things we were talking earlier about paranormal investigation, and I talk sometimes about paranormal programs, both approvingly and not approvingly, depending on the program. Some of them are quite interesting and insightful. Some of them are quite ridiculous, depending on who's doing them. But one of the things they have done is they do often have Wiccan and pagan people involved who are shown in a positive sense. And I think that's very, very good for us. And anywhere that we can get ourselves, anywhere that we can show ourselves as good and positive people, we're going to be better off. We're going to improve the situation for everyone. And yes, there are always people who are going to criticize us. Some will criticize us over disagreements, some will make up disagreements, and some will make up all kinds of things. If you look again at the Satanic Panic, there are people writing books about how they escaped from covens with thousands of members, um, when no such thing existed um, at that time or now. There are certain large organizations and full-blown churches that have thousands of members, but not individual groups, and certainly not in the 1980s. But they printed these lies, and very few people actually questioned them. That's why we need to get our story out there. That's one of the reasons I do this program. That's one of the reasons we've done so much video for so many years. And, I look at the world and I wonder, how is the world going to remember us? How will it remember me? And what I come back to is, I have to trust the life that I've lived and the work that I've done to speak for itself. And we all, in the end, have to do that. Um, and I think that when we look at life in general, we kind of have to have a certain level of trust. We have to trust the universe. We have to trust the deities that we honor, however we honor them. And life has its ups and downs. And as a movement, we've had our ups and downs. The Pentacle Quest, for many of the years, was a bit of a down because we were fighting for something so seemingly ordinary. But it was a great up when we won it. And we have won it presumably indefinitely. But someday someone will try to make a challenge against it, and we have to be ready for that. We have to remain vigilant to maintain the freedoms that we have won, and we have to continue working for them. And we have to remain vigilant against those who would divide us, because only if we can stand together do we have any chance of doing any of this. Very, very few, if any, of our organizations can truly stand alone in the face of Christian dominionism, which is far larger than our entire community. So, once again, I come back to that subject, but the Pentacle Quest directly deals with it. It was a fight against those forces. And again, we won it. And we won it by making it about veterans' rights. We did not win it based on pagan rights. But we did help people to see that we are people too, just like themselves. So with that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour. Please join me tomorrow when my guest will be Ed the Pagan, and we'll be talking about the Gaia Thrift Project. Now let us close with our prayer as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to help us to project into the world the truth of our lives. Help us to help others to see us clearly and honestly as a movement and as people. Beloved ones, we trust in you and ask you to lead us forward. And we rejoice in your presence in our lives, beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors. With great love, we thank you for all that you do for us every day in our lives, and knowing you are always with us from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always, and I'll see you tomorrow.